Life, in the sense of things that are alive, is strong. It's durable, and it's adventurous. No matter the obstacles, it will conquer new spaces and, given the opportunity, fill every niche it can reach. To quote famous words,
life finds a way.
The Bibites is an artificial life evolution simulation I've been working on for many years, increasing its depth and complexity to the point where the entities it hosts qualifies as life according to most accepted definitions. The Bibites, these cute life forms, gain energy from digesting food and use it to grow, move, and reproduce. They evolve over generation due to natural selection because of random genetic and brain mutations, eventually displaying complex behaviors and forming a completely new tree of life, independent from the one that started on Earth billions of years ago. So what better test of the simulation to try to replicate one of the most famous long-term evolution experiments in history and see how our digital life compares to the real deal. Welcome to the incredible world of the Bibites. In 1989, scientists decided to study evolution hands-on and started breeding bacteria in vials filled with a glucose-enriched solution. Each day they would replace the vials, freezing samples for record keeping, with new ones seeded with the previously bacteria, repeating this over 35 years, continuing to present day. They have witnessed evolution over 75,000 generations. In human terms, that's the equivalent of over 1.8 million years. Enough time for Homo erectus to evolve into modern-day humans. You might have heard about this experiment in a video from the popular YouTube channel Veritasium. In the beginning of that video, Derek shared another experiment where they let bacteria evolve across strips of agar containing increasing concentration of antibiotics. Over a matter of days, the bacteria evolved new resistances and gradually colonized the strips, an example of evolution in real time. Our simulation gives us a lot of control to set up custom environments. So, inspired by these two experiments, we created a scenario with 6 distinct zones of pellet fertility and density. The further east the zone, the more scarce food becomes, with the zones becoming larger to maintain a constant total energy in each. By introducing basic Bibites into the first and most fertile zone, we will observe how they evolve, adapt, and migrate across thousands of generations. We started running the simulation a few months ago using the then most recent version of the simulation, which has many new tools to help log and track information. The 0.6 release is out now, for free as always, if you head to our website. We're also announcing the official launch of the game on Steam. But first, we really should get going with the simulation. So more on this at the end of the video. Starting the simulation, the basic Bibites easily colonize the westmost, denser zone. They have very basic brains and their genes are nothing special to write home about. They are attracted to plant food and will slow down when close to pellets. However, they are not particularly efficient and are not able to survive in the eastern regions, as they run out of energy too quickly looking for food pellets that are further apart. They are the same default Bibites as the ones used to see the 100-hour Tree Island video, but we expect them to develop very differently this time around. Not too long after, we have our first species, basic Nolanus jonesi. For fun, and as it was a good way of getting many unique names quickly, I decided that species, by default, will be automatically named by the simulation using Latinized version of our patron's name. So if you've been supporting the project, ever did so in the past, or will in the future, you'll eventually find the Bibit species named after you. Of course, you can still name species yourself, but I thought it was a cute idea. In this case, Nolan J was translated to Nolanus jonesi, the first new species of this simulation. Unfortunately, the celebration was short-lived, as the species was plagued with a gnarly mutation that made them slow down to a standstill in front of pellets. Instead of eating them, they would often stand mere inches away, fascinated, mesmerized even, to the point of starving themselves. It's sad, but in a world where survival of the fittest is the rule, there is no place for a heart that really appreciates beauty. Moving on, it didn't take long for Bibits to reach into the new zones, the first Bibit being spotted in the 6th eastmost and least dense region after just 5 hours. However, at this point, we are still mostly talking about lost wanderers more than natives, as no species had yet specialized for those environments, and most visitors end up starving to death. No species yet had adaptations that would keep them from wandering too far and getting lost in the void. This was especially detrimental for species living in the first zone, which was very small and easy to wander out of. But we'll see how that plays out. Let's keep going. Okay, down. The Bibits have now reproduced so much and are so numerous that the simulation has been slowing down significantly. If we ever want to reach our goal of 1,000 hours just to justify a clickbaity video title, we're going to have to adapt. Since the biggest strain on the simulation is the number of entities, we need to reduce that number. We have the option to Thanos snap half of the population instantly, which would help the performance, but would only be temporary, as they would immediately start repopulating up to the environment's carrying capacity. We would need to organize culls at frequent intervals, and while the idea of a periodic Bibit purge is entertaining, it would be too much of a hassle to press that easy to press right there in the corner button every once in a while. A better and more durable approach would be to simply lower global food production by a small amount, making all zones a tiny bit less fertile, but still viable. Oops, might have been too aggressive with the fertility slider here. Oh well. Accidents happen, and I shouldn't be too hard on myself. At least the Bibits were not yet very intelligent, so they probably did not suffer too much. It could have been worse. But still, we should fix this. As gods, we can simply wipe that embarrassing event from history and rewind the clock to try again. There, a lot better. A small dip in population for a smoother and faster simulation. I think even the Bibits will agree it's worth it. They better. After 30 hours, we're finally starting to see species adapted to different conditions. The new lineage tree panel allows us to easily track the general history of the sim, and we clearly see two main lineages taking root. Both descended from the initial basic Bibit, but as they evolved in different environments, they started adapting and specializing in unique ways. Basic Archgamericus is more adapted to a denser environment. They primarily inhabit the first and second zones, where food is closely packed together and Bibits will often run into one another. Their field of view has narrowed to be able to focus on few pellets and not be distracted. They try to avoid others through negative stimulation of their herding node, a mutation that came up early in their ancestry as they started to specialize for the denser regions. Also interesting, despite the high cost to do so, their bite strength increased significantly, signifying that those collisions still happened frequently. It's also possible that this is what allowed them to take over their patch of decimation as they wiped out other species through aggression. Basic Mullerianus is slower and moves around more efficiently, searching for pellets that are further apart. Their field of view got bigger and wider to make sure to miss as few pellets as possible. They don't have to worry as much about competition and running into other individuals, so Mullerianus didn't have as big of an incentive to evolve high bite strength. However, they did display a basic avoidance technique to turn away when they see other Bibites. These adaptations led to Mullerianus thriving in Zone 3 and 4. Some extra hardy individuals even called Zones 5 and 6 home, becoming the first to be born, reproduce, and die in the sparsest areas. At 75 hours, things really start to get interesting. Opening the lineage graph, we can clearly see something significant is happening. And weirdly so. You see, in biology, there's a concept called the genetic drift, which means that in the absence of any selection pressure, there will still be fluctuations in a population genetics over time. That's usually the case with a Bibite's color genes. Their color drifts randomly and slowly over time, often remaining dull and grayish. You could even say that high color genes and general flashiness should be weakly selected against, since it makes you stand out and an easier target. So the fact that we have a whole lineage that started displaying such a vivid red in just a few generations indicates that selection was very likely at play. In this case, even with all the new tools and statistics at our disposal, it was difficult to determine what selection pressure promoted this red color. We can only guess as to what actually happened, but from what I garnered, this all started with their ancestor, the dense zone Archgamericus. While they didn't display any strong coloration themselves, they did have a few mutations that would ultimately be the start of a very interesting tale. Bibites have neural network brains that evolve with them, and they often develop new brain connections that are purely random and serve no purpose. In the case of Archgamericus, a few mutations created new connections toward green pheromone sensing and production. By themselves, those mutations provided no benefit to the species, but it did impact the evolutive landscape. The production and sensing of pheromones often carries very useful information and allows for intraspecies and interspecies communication. Even in its simplest form, a basic scent can signal presence, population density, and other useful local metrics, so the evolutive pressure to make use of it is pretty strong. The evolution of pheromone usage often follows this pathway of it first being random and then making use of the information it provides. It even is being theorized as the principal evolutive mechanism here with Earth's life. Over the next 10 to 15 hours, a new prominent lineage emerged, Nolan martinus, that started using green pheromones for all kinds of important behaviors, like regulating their egg production, their growth, and so on. In an oddly synchronized event, Nolan martinus and Warpoi, another descendant lineage of Archgamericus, got contrasting mutation that would bring the red into this story. Nolan-Martinus abacarus, the prominent species with a far bigger share of the environment, got a random mutation that prevented the production of green pheromone that they relied so heavily on when seeing red pigmented Bibites, while the 4 more modest Warpoe got the opposite adaptation, increasing production when seeing red. As they both relied pretty heavily on those pheromones, this perfect storm of environmental incentive drove the appearance of a new lineage, the Tobias, descendants of Warpoe, now in a race toward a redder population in order to disrupt the abacarus life cycle. This unique advantage led them to outcompete abacarus and completely colonize the denser regions, spreading their vibrant hues to our eye's satisfaction. Of course, the Nolan-Martinus lineage now had a pretty strong incentive to correct their weakness to red Bibites, which they eventually managed to do, but only after paying the significant price of being pushed out of their ancestral grounds. Checkmate racists, we now have proof that caring about the colors of others makes you weak and very easy to exploit. At the same time as the Tobias lineage became increasingly red, they started to grow. Their actual size gene stayed pretty flat, but they started shifting their other genes that impacted their maturity at birth and growth, which produced a similar result. This seemed to be driven by a small pressure toward case selection, the tendency for organisms to invest more time and energy in their young. Their brain also started growing significantly, making them the most intelligent species of the simulation, to the point where it's pretty hard to make sense of anything going on there, helping support the hypothesis that they started investing more energy in their eggs and youngs. All I know is that now that the red flashy giants populate the denser regions, it makes it hard to care at all about any of the other contemporary lineages. But still, they deserve a little bit of love, so... We have the Martiani genus, descendant of Nolan-Martinus, which was pushed out of the denser zones and now inhabits the middle zones. Fun. They have started moving into the parser zones and slowly pushing out their old inhabitants, the Grassmanus lineage. Grassmanus is directly descended from Mullerianus, and their last common ancestor with the other main lineages goes all the way back to the original basic Bibit. They also rapidly evolved to live slow life, so not many generations have passed for them. The latest species are at most around generation 60, while Tobias have no members younger than generation 180, and Martiani hangs around 120. But enough about those two non-Tobias losers. I want to see how things go for our main characters. At 100 hour, exactly where we ended our experiment last time, seems like a good place to take a break and see how Tobias' descendants are doing. Oh no. We are back to a world of dull and grayish colors, and seeing this crash in brain-size historical data is painful. What a loss. From looking at the graphs and historical distribution of the different species, it looks like the new Tuillus lineage, also descendant of Nolan-Martinus, wiped out both its sister lineages, Martiani and the Tobias red giants, and from what it seems, mostly through aggression. They developed very high bite strength and adjusted their herding genes to subvert the system into making them ram into any other Bibit they found. Another adaptation they have is that density makes them even more aggressive. When they see a lot of Bibits, it makes them produce green pheromones, which in turn makes them more aggressive. It probably was a driving factor in their extermination of the Tobias lineage. as they become more and more aggressive as they migrated toward the denser zones. It's also pretty crazy to look at that new lineage history and see that their ancestor, Nolan Martinus Montamboltus, what a name, almost went extinct, being down to only one alive member. And still they managed to climb back up the evolutive ladder and bring to complete extinction the two lineages that used to bully it. Look, I used to think that Tobias, with their flashy colors and big brains, were the bomb. But come on, you must respect Tuilius here and their ancestors for what they went through. What an incredible underdog story, just like mammals in the age of the dinosaurs. Tuilius saboritelus now populates the denser regions, and they have developed a pretty interesting strategy. They only become aggressive when their species is attacked. When studied in its totality, it's a pretty strong defense mechanism. In times of peace, Saboritelus is laid back, but as soon as one of their members is attacked, it produces green pheromones, and others in the area will produce a spray of red pheromones, creating a wider and more durable area of aggression and frenzy, hunting for the intruder. The Grassmanus lineage is still the master of the sparser regions, and surprisingly, the first species of the lineage, Schiffeltus, is still around after close to 30 hours, although it's slowly being outcompeted by its descendants. Things move a lot more slowly in those regions. With all species increasing in efficiency, the population has again reached unsustainable levels for our poor computer, so we once more lowered global fertility by a small amount. Sorry Bibites, dark times ahead. Again, it had to be done. At least it should be the last time, hopefully. We are now reaching 150 hours, and a new species has become the new last universal common ancestor, often called Luca. Right beforehand, we had two main lineages, both having the initial basic Bibit as their last common ancestor, which is pretty crazy when you think about it. While all the drama we covered so far was unfolding, the Grassmanus lineages had been residing comfortably and straight up chilling in these sparser zones for more than 120 hours, until the Fire Nation attacked. Our new Luca, Tuilius musica, child species of the territorial Saboritelus, took over the denser zones and kept spreading, eradicating all the other lineages. Aside from the concept of Luca, there's also the title of the first universal common ancestor, called the Fuca, which in this case would still be held by the initial basic Bibit. Musica had many useful generic adaptations that allowed it to thrive and spread to the whole map. They were pretty small and had an increased field of view radius, despite starting off in the denser zone where it's usually not particularly selected for. They also were master of efficiency, presenting several adaptations like reducing their egg production proportionally to their speed, which had the effect of only producing eggs when they slowed down to feed on pellets. Similarly, their growth neuron was tied to their age in a way that allowed them to focus on finding their first meal before starting to use energy to grow. Now, two lineages, descendants of Musica, almost fully control the whole simulation. Noturbingus fills the 4 sparser regions and has fully adapted to those environments with a larger field of view. Their avoidance behavior, a commonplace adaptation in the simulation, was scaled with their energy level, which meant that the closer to starving they were, the less they cared about avoiding others. While Goblin Gracilis occupies the first 2 dances. They are the most sophisticated species we've seen so far, and an era of peace has settled across the denser regions. They display some kind of pecking behavior, backing off from a pellet after taking a bite, which allows multiple Bibits to simultaneously feed on the same pellet. Another funny adaptation is that when carrying eggs, they'll start wanting to avoid the others more strongly and will tend to lay eggs in isolation, increasing their chance of survival. This fits within the general trend we've been seeing toward case selection and investing more energy into their offspring. This also has the impact of making speciation a lot slower, so starting now, we'll probably have to zoom further across the timeline to find interesting things. Since musicas take over, the number of Bibites in the submission has been gradually dropping from close to 1,000 down to only around 400, while their share of the world's biomass has been trending slightly upward, suggesting that Bibites have been living longer and reaching bigger sizes. And indeed, that's what we can see in the only two prominent species currently alive, Notorbingus atmandrus and Lesordus deltark studio. Lesordus is holding on to the densest region for its dear life, not even controlling its totality. Notorbingus has spread to control more than 95% of the fertile areas, which is easily seen as they use blue pheromones to delimitate their territory. Despite this pressure, Lesordus has grown to impressive size and seems to be adapting to this invasion, as they have developed armor to protect from attacks and are very aggressive, even more so when detecting blue pheromones, often killing the invading Notorbinguses. Even with their heroic stand, they appear likely to lose the war in the long run, leaving them with not much time left. Notorbingus releases blue pheromone when seeing pellets, which helps delimitate the actually fertile zones from the void. Remember that they are not seeing the green zones that we are. Despite being relatively small when reaching adulthood, they keep growing throughout their long lives, often becoming quite sizable in their elder years, many reaching ages over 5 hours. Which might not look like much to you, but you're not a Bibite, so a little respect is in order. In addition, their peaceful adult nature and sharp eyes make life less of a struggle. Many elders overindulge in plant pellets, leading to pervasive obesity in the population, especially in the denser regions. Moving on, with the longer life expectancy and greater time between generations, we are letting more time pass to make sure we have interesting developments to share. At 500 hours, the population climbed back up to almost 700 individuals, which is still manageable for our computers since the number of pellets has been dropping. Along with their count, the Bibites' total biomass has also kept rising, suggesting that they got even more efficient at finding food and using energy with minimal waste. And would you look at that? The Lesordus lineage made it out alive after all. Their descendant, the Blake Patty lineage, is still thriving in the denser zones, regaining their ancestral territory. And in the sparser zones, we have the Dumoulin-Hurtus lineage, comprised of 3 main species, preserving many ancestral adaptations that have allowed them to still thrive. At this point, evolution has slowed down quite a bit and genes have mostly stabilized. Most of the interesting developments now come from brain mutations. In general, it's now pretty difficult to look at their brain and distill their behavior, with so many interacting systems and crossing connections. They all have multiple senses connected to their acceleration and rotation nodes, making it hard to predict their movement from looking at their brains alone. We now mostly have to rely on observing their actions to decipher their behavior. From watching these critters, it's obvious their movements and interaction are much more organic, with a high degree of variation between individuals, even within the same species. Some people, but not me, could even start talking about the Bibites possibly displaying some kind of personality. But again, not me. I'm not saying that. some of you are, or I know some of you will. I have to remain scientific and not lose myself in hypotheticals here. But I'm just saying, some of you will say that this might be a form of individual personalities. And I think you should know that some of you will say that. Some of the species, especially in the Dumoulin harvest lineage, have started laying eggs again. To people not on Patreon that don't have access to the alpha releases of the simulation, it may seem like a weird statement, since Bibit can only lay eggs in version 0.5.1 and older. But since a code change allowing Bibits to live birth their babies, live births have become the standard method of baby production. Egg laying is now pretty rare, and that's mostly my fault for incorrectly balancing the multiple genes and interdependent systems used for reproduction. I should probably fix that. But anyways, since the start of this simulation, Bibits have been live birthing their babies, and they just now started to lay eggs again, after 500 hours. Oopsie. Moving on. And oh my god, yeah, alright, finally, we got our video title. It's not clickbait anymore. But in all seriousness, this is an incredible milestone, and the efficiency and longevity that the Bibits in this simulation have achieved is very impressive. We started from the humble basic Bibit, went through the rise and fall of the great big-brained red giant Tobias to impressive territorial tactics, through a Musica taking over and becoming the new Luca. We have seen so much, and all that remains is to see what is now happening after 1,000 hours. From a quick view of the lineage graph, it's obvious that there are 3 distinct lineages, each with a unique red, green, or blue color, possibly hiding some kind of color speciation or something like that. The red lineage, still named Dumoulin harvest, populates the 2 sparser zones. They are an ultimate display of efficiency and longevity, with some individuals living longer than a full day. During their long life, they can grow to be as big as 7 grams, which again doesn't sound like much, but you're not a Bibit, so yeah. Their brain are highly optimized with a minimal number of connections, preserving only the most useful behaviors for living in the land of scarcity. The blue lineage, named Cadillacus, populates the middle zones from 3 to 5. They have very similar traits to Dumoulin harvest, but less extreme in their optimization and neural purity. And finally, the green lineage, named Gilbertus mucualis, spans across the denser zones, with a small overlap with Cadillacus. They are the only species to maintain significant brain size, as the value of intelligently navigating the more densely populated regions is worth the extra cost. The Bibits have specialized to an incredible level, to the point where migration and inter-zone competition doesn't even seem possible, although they still all have Tuilius Musica as their Luca. And we haven't seen much changes in terms of territory since then. This underlines the need to add a lot more dynamism to the simulation, both in terms of spatial variations with setting different conditions like we did with the zones here, but with much more parameters, and in ways for the Bibits to impact their environments in more ways than just, I eat a lot of pellets, so there's less of it. My dream is to see the simulation being able to make beaver-like Bibits a reality. Bibits that would mold the environment to their liking. But for sure, that's quite far off. Still, it's useful to have a destination in mind, and who knows, we might be able to do so faster than we all thought. Having cycles, like seasons or day-night like variations, would also be interesting, and are eventually planned. Still, looking at the Bibites that we have by now, efficiency is again the main trait that we can observe. Bibites have gotten significantly larger, and now they display the heaviest K-selection bias I have observed in the simulation so far, ever. It makes sense as well. In the vein of becoming more and more efficient, you start to care more and more about your children and making sure that they live. Investing all the energy to produce a child only for it to die randomly right away wouldn't be very efficient. There were many similitudes in our simulation compared to the real-world experiment it was based upon. While the default basic Bibite originally couldn't survive in the sparser zones, they eventually produced adaptations that allowed them to do so. Just like the bacteria were able to eventually survive in the zone with the heaviest concentration of antibiotics. And compared to the long-term evolution experiment, we only achieved close to 1800 generations within our 1000 hours. A far cry from the 75,000 generations they achieved. At least it only took us 10 months. Well, they've been at it for the past 35 years, so we'll take the crown on this one. Furthermore, in the bacterial experiment, they also saw the number of bacteria decrease over time, while each individual bacteria got larger. Another obvious similarity is in the population's relative fitness trend over generations. With each generation, the fitness increases, but does so at a slower rate. It's fascinating that we see parallels between the real and the digital world. These findings only confirm that the Bibites is on the right track to being the best artificial life simulation ever created. Like promised, we have had a lot going on since the last video, and a lot that I want to share. First of all, the long-awaited 0.6.0 public version of the simulation is available, and as always, for free on our website. It's been a while since the last public update, but I think you'll find it worth the wait. Aside from the smaller things and changes to the simulation's inner workings, a big focus of this update is to give all the tools and information needed to track what happens throughout a simulation, be it from historical trends, statistics, and conditions, to automatically categorizing species and tracking lineages. We tried using as many of these features as possible throughout this video to give you a glimpse of what's possible. Because if you recall, in my 100-hour video, I did all of the species identification and tracking by hand, which was highly time-consuming, error-prone, and generally unsustainable for a longer simulation like this one was. I am excited to see what the community discovers with these new tools at their disposal. Also, like I mentioned previously, this simulation was ran with the now pretty old version of the Bibites, and a lot have changed since then. Among other things, Bibites now have internal organs that share their space inside the Bibite, with genes controlling their respective size and usefulness, meaning Bibites will have even more tools to specialize to different roles. Maybe you don't care that much about having a bigger stomach and prefer growing larger muscles, or a bigger womb to lay bigger clutches of eggs. There's a lot of possibilities, but I'll explain all the specifics in a future video. If interested, the full list of new features is available in the batch note. I'm also very happy to announce that the simulation is coming to Steam. This has been a request for a very long time, many years in fact. And after a lot of thinking, we settled on a good compromise that will help the project's development while staying true to our ideals. So, the game will remain available for free on itch.io and our website, where it will be kept up to date with the latest public releases. At the same time, the game will be available on Steam for a small price. We're aiming for something around $10 at launch. This will be making the installation process simpler and giving access to a few nice-to-haves like the Steam Workshop for sharing scenarios, species, and such, Steam achievements, and cloud backup of your simulations. The Steam page is already up, as we're aiming to launch as soon as possible, probably in a few months. And it would mean the world to me if you wishlisted the sim. After all, that's pretty much the only metric that matters at launch, and the one Steam uses to push a game when published. This dual approach of keeping it free while still having it on Steam will allow us to keep financing the project while staying true to our ideals of access to science. If it goes well and the project gets a little more funds, we would be able to hire more people to help develop and improve the project faster and better. Be it coding more complex systems, localizing the simulation in other languages, or putting out more videos. Up to now, we've always been able to rely on our supporters on Patreon, which are the backbone of this project, allowing to support me while I'm working full-time on it. So all of you that have been supporting us for a while will receive a free Steam key on launch day as a thank you for our eternal gratitude. If you'd like to also support the project and gain access to cool benefits like access to the alpha versions in between public releases, having species in-game named after you, or add your own Easter eggs inside of the simulation, like a radioactive bibit that mutates other around it, or a rainbow bibit that is always the right color, head to Patreon. Lastly, we still have the Bibit store, where a few curated items are available for you if you want to support us while receiving something a little more tangible. All the links are right here in the description. Because the project has grown so much and it's getting harder and harder to maintain, and that the YouTube algorithm has been penalizing us for it quite a bit, this is the last video where we'll have a Patreon simulation at the end, so enjoy. And thank you all for your continuous interest for the project. As always, I'll see you next time.